The dogman in the first cell liked to press one hand flat against the inside of the door when I came down the corridor, not to get out. I worked that out eventually. It was to feel the vibration of the cart. He knew the cart meant food, and he wanted to feel it coming before he could hear it. The one in cell 4 used to line the bones from her tray along the base of the door in a row, largest to smallest, every single day. And every single day the handlers would sweep them away, and every single day she would do it again. I did not know what it meant. I still do not. But she did it for 14 months, and I never once saw her miss a bone or put one out of order. I was paid $180,000 a year to feed 8 dogmen 3 times a day, and to ask no questions about where they came from, what was in their food, or where the shipping crates in the supply wing were headed. Tonight I am going to answer all 3 of those questions. And you are going to understand why the United States government has been keeping dogmen alive in a hole in the ground for 40 years. So, before we continue, make sure you subscribe and let us know where you are watching from. Thanks. My name does not matter. What matters is that 2 years ago, I was a 50-year-old divorced former military corrections officer, 3 months behind on a mortgage, sitting at a VFW hall in eastern Pennsylvania, trying to decide whether to sell the house my grandfather built or default on it. A man sat down at my table. He was in his 60s, clean-shaven, civilian clothes cut like he did not wear them often. He bought me a drink. He said he had heard about my situation from a mutual acquaintance. He said he represented a private contractor that did remote site security work for the federal government. He said they needed a man with corrections experience, a clean record, and no immediate family. He said the pay was $180,000 a year, tax-free, cash deposits to an account they would set up for me. He said there would be no questions asked and no questions answered. He said if I was interested, a lawyer would meet me at my house the following morning with paperwork. I said I was interested. I should not have. But I did. The lawyer arrived at 7 in the morning with a folder 3 inches thick. I signed my life away in 47 places. The non-disclosure agreement was 62 pages. I did not read all of them. Looking back, I think they counted on that. 2 days later, a black SUV picked me up at a rest stop on I-80 Point. I was told to bring 1 duffel bag. I was told to leave my phone at home. I was driven for 6 hours. The last 2 hours, I was blindfolded. When the blindfold came off, I was in a helicopter. I could not see much through the windows, just black ridges of the Allegheny Range sliding past in the dark. We landed at what looked like a gravel lot in the middle of nowhere. There was a concrete bunker entrance, the size of a 2-car garage, set into the side of a mountain. Condemned signs were posted all around it, rusted and decades old. The whole surface looked abandoned. An elevator took me down. The ride lasted almost 3 full minutes. I counted. At the bottom, I was 300 feet below the surface. Inside a decommissioned Cold War-era army installation that does not appear on any public map in the United States. The man who met me at the elevator handed me a uniform without insignia and a badge with a 6-digit number and no name. He handed me a 60-page operations manual, bound in plain black. He said my training would begin in the morning. He said to read the manual tonight. He said there would be a test. I read the manual twice. The word subjects appeared on nearly every page. The word animal appeared 0 times. The word prisoner appeared 0 times. I noticed this. I said nothing. My job, as briefed, was straightforward. 3 feedings a day along Corridor C. Push the cart from the prep kitchen to the corridor seal. Slide the tray through the slot at the base of each door. Retrieve the previous tray. Return the cart. 8 doors. 24 trays a day. I was instructed not to speak to the subjects, which struck me as strange, because I had been told they were animals, and I have never once in my life felt the need to be told not to speak to an animal. I was instructed not to look through the observation slots, not to put any part of my body past the plane of a door. If a subject became active, a word the manual defined on page 41, with language I could not parse on first read, I was to retreat to the corridor seal, hit the red button, and wait for the handlers. The handlers were a separate team. I never learned their names. They wore white hazmat suits and moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had done the same job for a long time. My first walk down Corridor C was on a Tuesday at 5:30 in the morning. The lights in the corridor were cold blue-white, the kind they use in surgical theaters. The air smelled like bleach, and under the bleach, it smelled like a kennel that had never once been aired out. And under that, it smelled like something I did not have a word for, and did not want one. 8 steel doors lined the left wall. Each door had a small rectangular observation slot at eye level, and a feeding slot at knee height. The right wall was bare concrete. There was a drain in the center of the corridor floor every 20 feet. I pushed the cart, I slid the trays, I retrieved the previous ones. Every door was silent. Behind every door, something heavy shifted its weight and went still, tracking me by sound. When I finished the round, I was done in under 11 minutes. I walked back to the staff quarters thinking this might be the easiest money I had ever earned in my life. That thought lasted exactly 7 days. The 8th day, I was at door 4 when I made my first mistake. I looked. I did not mean to. The slot at eye level was open a crack, and I glanced up out of pure animal instinct, the same instinct that makes you look when something large moves at the edge of your vision. There was an eye on the other side of the slot, level with mine, waiting. It was not a dog's eye. It was not a wolf's eye. It was too far forward on the skull for that, set to look ahead the way ours do. And it was watching me with a steadiness that no frightened animal has. It was not frightened. It was measuring me. It held my gaze for as long as I held its, and it did not blink first. I stepped back. The eye stayed at the slot. That night, I lay in my bunk and told myself I had imagined the steadiness. Animals do not measure you. I had spent 12 years in corrections, and I knew the difference between a man sizing you up and a dog reacting to movement. And I told myself, over and over, that what I had seen was the second thing. I did not believe myself, but I told myself anyway. Over the following weeks, I broke the rule again and again. I looked. I could not stop looking. And what I saw through those slots was not a row of monsters, and it was not a row of people. It was something I had no shelf to put on. They were huge, 7 feet, some of them taller, when they stood, and they stood more often than a wolf would, long-limbed. Covered in dark matted fur that thinned to bare gray hide at the joints where they rubbed against the concrete, wolf-headed, with a long heavy snout and a jaw that could take my arm off through the feeding slot if I had ever been foolish enough to leave it there, which the manual had been very clear about, and which I now understood the reason for. But it was the way they behaved that got under my skin and stayed there. The one in door 1 pressed his hand to the door to feel the cart. The one in door 4 laid out her bones. The one in door 6 would not eat until he had dragged his entire tray to the far corner of his cell, turned his back to the door, and eaten facing the wall every time, as if being watched while he ate was a thing he would not tolerate. They were not reacting. They were doing things. They had ways of doing things. Each one had ways that were its own, and there were other ways that all of them shared, and I started to understand, slowly, that I was not feeding 8 animals. I was feeding the surviving members of something that had once been a group, a pack. A pack with rules, carried by animals smart enough to keep the rules even after the pack was gone, and there was nothing left to keep them for. That was the thing that started to break my heart, if I am honest with you. Not that they were like us, they were not like us. It was that they were like each other, and they had been taken from each other, and they still kept doing the things the group had done, alone. Behind 8 separate doors, for no one. I started lingering. I started staying a few extra seconds at door 4 to watch her set out the bones. I never told the handlers. I never wrote it in my shift reports. I started carrying it down the corridor 3 times a day, like a stone in my chest. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for what comes later. I felt sorry for them. I did. But I never once forgot what they were. Not for a single second. Every time I felt the pull to think of them as anything softer than what they were. All I had to do was look at the jaw behind the slot, or the way the claws had worn grooves into the steel around the doors. Grooves inches deep in solid steel, and the softness went away and left the fear behind it, clean and cold. And then, in the 5th week, door 6 taught me exactly how right the fear was. It was a Wednesday. There was no moon above ground that night, not that it would have mattered 300 feet down. A handler I had seen maybe twice was running a health check on the subject in door 6. This was above my level, and I only saw the start of it. 2 handlers, the tranquilizer protocol, the whole procedure by the book. The subject had taken the dart. It had gone down. They had waited the required time. They had opened the door. It was not all the way down. I was at the far end of the corridor with my cart when I heard the door of cell 6 come open. And then I heard a sound I had heard exactly once before, years earlier, standing too close to industrial machinery when a man got pulled into it. It is a specific sound. It is the sound of a body coming apart faster than a body is meant to. I did not see most of it. I have been grateful for that every day since. I saw the end of it. I saw one of the handlers come backward out of the doorway of cell 6 and not get up, and I saw the shape that came out after him, upright, enormous, moving with a speed that nothing that size should be able to move with. And I saw the second handler get the door closed on it by a margin I do not want to think about. The alarms went, the corridor sealed. I was on the wrong side of the seal for about 4 seconds, which is the longest 4 seconds of my life. And then I was on the right side of it, with my back against cold steel, and my legs gone entirely. The handler in cell 6 did not survive. I want to say that plainly, because it is the center of everything I understood after that night. Whatever I had been building in my head about the bones and the customs and the pack, whatever soft thing I had let grow there. That handler had it too, probably, and it did not save him. Because the thing behind door 6 was not tame and was never going to be tame, and did not care one way or the other about being understood. It was a smart animal, the smartest animal I have ever been near, and a smart animal that wants you dead is worse than a stupid one, not better. They brought in a man I had never seen before to debrief me. He was calm, he did not apologize for anything. He explained for the first time what was actually happening in Corridor C. He told me the subjects were dogmen. He used the word without hesitation, like he was telling me the weather. He told me they were not people, and they were not folklore. They were a real animal, a large pack predator native to the deep country of this continent, that had survived by being intelligent enough to stay away from us, and rare enough that the few times anyone saw one, no one was believed. He told me the facility had been operating since 1984. He told me the program had a different name every 5 years for budget reasons, and that I did not need to know any of the names. He told me my job had just been upgraded. I would keep feeding them. I would also start logging behavior, because the handlers wanted a second set of eyes on the subjects, a set that saw them every day at close range. I would receive a raise. I asked him what happened if I wanted out. He smiled the specific, patient smile of a man who had answered this question many times before. He told me the NDA I had signed was enforceable under a category of federal statute that did not appear in any public law library. He told me people who attempted to leave the program before their contracts expired did not successfully leave the program. He did not threaten me. He did not need to. I went back to my bunk that night, and I did not sleep, and I understood 2 things at the same time, and I have never been able to hold them apart since. The first thing was that these were animals, dangerous animals, and one of them had just killed a man 20 feet from where I stood. The second thing was that they had done nothing to deserve a concrete box 300 feet underground, any more than a wolf deserves it, or a bear, and that the row of bones at the base of door 4 was going to be there again in the morning, laid out largest to smallest, by an animal that missed something it could not name and could not stop reaching for. Both things were true. That is the part the manual did not prepare me for. Both things were true at once, and I had to walk down that corridor 3 times a day holding both of them. That was when I decided I was going to find out what the crates were for. I started my log in the 6th week. Officially for the handlers, unofficially for myself. I smuggled a second set of pages, 1 sheet at a time, from the supply wing, wrote them in a code I had used during my military days, and hid them behind a loose ventilation panel in my bunk. I recorded everything. Which subject did what, and when. The bones at door 4, the hand at door 1, the wall facing at door 6 before 6 was emptied. The way 3 of them would, on certain nights, start a low sound at the same moment without any signal I could detect. A sound too low to really hear, more felt in the chest than heard, all of them at once, and then stop at the same moment. As if something had been agreed, the handlers had a word for it in their own logs. I saw it once. The word was chorus. I did not understand the chorus. I am not sure the handlers did either. But it was not random, and it was not one animal copying another. It was coordinated across sealed concrete cells by animals that could not see each other. Whatever it was, they had brought it in with them from wherever they had been a pack, and they still did it in the dark, together and alone at the same time. I logged it for 7 months. I filled more than 200 pages. The folklore says these things are men who turn into beasts under a full moon. The folklore is wrong twice over. They were never men, and there was no moon that reached them and no schedule I could find in their behavior at all. They were simply animals, living animal lives in a place built to make animal lives impossible. I had been at the facility for 9 months when I found the pallet. I was pulling inventory in the supply wing, which was not part of my normal duties, but which every staff member rotated through on a 6-week cycle. I had done it 4 times before without incident. That afternoon, in the back of Bay 7, I found a pallet that did not match the inventory sheet. It was stacked with a dozen shipping crates. Unmarked wood, banded with steel, sealed with a kind of industrial tape I had not seen used anywhere else in the facility. Each crate was long, and wide, and tall, and reinforced, and built for something that stood taller than a man and did not want to go where it was going. Each one had a shipping manifest stapled to the side. The manifests were in languages I could not read. I looked at them for a long time. I checked the corridor behind me. I listened. I heard nothing. I had a phone in my locker. I had kept it there since my first week. Told myself I would never use it. Kept it as a kind of talisman, a thing to remind myself I still had a choice even when I did not. That afternoon, I used it. I photographed every manifest on the pallet, the serial numbers on the crates, the pallet, the bay number, the stack beside it. I put the phone back in my locker, finished my inventory shift, and told no one. 2 weeks later, I was due for rotation leave. 72 hours of surface time, supervised at a distance for staff morale purposes. I was taken by helicopter to a nondescript hotel outside of Pittsburgh, given cash, told not to contact anyone from my prior life. I took a cab to a community college on the far side of the city and found a graduate student in the linguistics department, whose name I had gotten from a bar conversation 2 years earlier, before I had ever met the contractor. I paid him $400 in an envelope to translate the photographs. I told him I had found them in an antique shop. I did not ask him to keep it secret. The less I asked, the less he would remember. He translated 5 of the manifests while I waited. The destinations were Caracas, Lagos, Dhaka, Quito, Kharkiv. The shipping dates were all in the next 6 months. I flew back on the 3rd day of my leave. I did not sleep on the helicopter. I did not sleep that night in my bunk. I had thought, up to that point, that the facility existed because the government had stumbled onto a dangerous animal and did not know what else to do but lock it away. I had thought Corridor C was a containment operation. It was not a containment operation. It was a supply operation. I started watching everything more carefully. The handlers, the kitchen, the maintenance crews that rotated through at 2 in the morning. The food rotations were not standardized. Some subjects were being fed to stay lean and quick. Others were being fed heavy, kept slow and docile. Their water was piped separately, cell by cell. The lighting cycles were controlled individually from a panel I had seen once through an open door. The handlers were not just keeping a captive animal alive. They were conditioning it, turning each subject week by week for a specific state on a specific date. Some for aggression, some for compliance long enough to load. They were preparing each animal for the crate, the way you prepare a weapon to be shipped, so it arrives ready to fire. That is what they were building. Not a zoo, not a study. A delivery system for a lethal wild predator, packed in an unmarked wooden crate, addressed to 5 cities in 5 countries in the next 6 months. I want you to think for a moment about why. A Dogman released into a fragile region is not a geopolitical event. It is not something a State Department files a memo about. It is rumor. It is folk panic. It is a wave of night killings in rural districts that empties villages and paralyzes local governments in the span of a week. And that never gets traced back to a decommissioned army base in Pennsylvania. Because no intelligence agency on Earth will write a memo that takes the word Dogman seriously. The cover is the myth itself. The program hides inside the world's refusal to believe the animal is real. And this is me speaking to you as someone who has spent a lot of time on trail stories digging into the research of people like Godfrey. The folk panic is not a side effect. It is the point. Every credible Dogman report in the historical record has been dismissed as mass hysteria, superstition, wolf sightings dressed up by frightened people. That dismissal is exactly what makes the weapon useful. They are not trying to convince anyone the animal is real. They are counting on no one believing it. So the killing is done and the region is broken before anyone can name what caused it. I went back to the supply wing a week later and found the shipping logs for the prior 3 years. The program had deployed 3 times already. I am not going to name the countries. I do not want to be responsible for pointing fingers at events that killed people. Because the animals still inside Corridor C are still alive. The handlers are still watching, and the crates are still shipping. I will tell you what I recognized. One destination matched a village evacuation I had read about 18 months earlier. Dozens of families displaced in a single night. The official explanation was a disease outbreak. The regional health authorities found no disease. The villagers refused to return. Another matched the country where a coup had happened the previous spring, attributed to political instability. The months before, it had included reports of night killings in rural districts, attributed to paramilitary violence. I am not saying there was no paramilitary violence. I am saying the timing was interesting. The third was a place nobody in the United States pays attention to, and I suspect that is precisely why it was chosen. I have no idea what it accomplished. I have no idea if anybody even noticed. Whatever went into those crates was one of the animals I fed 3 times a day. It was the hand at door 1, or the bones at door 4, or one of the others. It was a living thing that had done nothing but be born wild, in a country we had stopped believing was wild. And it was being shipped across the world to tear people apart, in the dark, so that a coup would go through or a valley would empty. And the survivors would spend the rest of their lives being told. They had imagined it. Everything changed in the 13th month. They put door 4 on the schedule. I did not find out the way you would think. There was no announcement. I found it the way I found everything, by paying attention. Her trays changed. The contents went heavy, the way they always did in the week before a door emptied. The lighting cycle in her cell shifted. A long reinforced crate appeared in Bay 7 with a serial number I did not recognize. I knew what it meant. I had watched it happen to 6 doors by then. I went down to Corridor C that night, in the quiet hours between shifts, when I was not supposed to be there, but was anyway. I stood at door 4 longer than I had ever let myself. She had laid out the bones, largest to smallest, in a row the way she did every day, for no one. I stood there and I looked at that row of bones through the slot, and I understood that in a matter of days it would be loaded into a box and flown to the other side of the world and let out into a place full of people who had never done anything to anyone, and that some of those people would die badly and never know why, and that the animal doing it would then most likely be hunted down and killed itself, alone, in country it had never chosen and could not understand. There was no version of this with a good end, not for the people at the destination, not for the animal in the crate, not for the one still behind the other 7 doors. I could not save the animal in door 4, I knew that. I did not have some plan to open the cells and lead a pack of apex predators to freedom. That is not a real thing a person can do, and if I had tried it, I would have died in the corridor and so would other people. But I could carry out what I had seen. The photographs, the manifests, the logs, the 3 prior deployments. I could put it somewhere. It could not be buried. So I decided I would. I had been mapping the facility for months, not on purpose, not at first. I had just been paying attention, the way you do when you work in a place that makes you uneasy. I knew where every camera was. I knew every shift change. I knew which corridors had motion sensors and which did not. I knew the maintenance tunnel system, because part of my training had included emergency egress procedures, and the tunnels branched off the main staff wing at 3 separate points. One of them terminated at a surface access hatch near the helipad. It was a rotation week. Staffing was thin. The handlers were down to 2 on duty, instead of 4. The quartermaster was off-site for a supply run. The kid who monitored the corridor cameras had been complaining for a month about a certification exam, and I knew from experience that he ran the feeds on a delayed loop during his shift so he could study without getting caught. I left Corridor C at the end of my afternoon round. I stopped at my bunk, pulled my log from behind the ventilation panel, took my phone from the locker, and sealed both in a waterproof sleeve inside my jacket. I brought nothing else. I did not want anything that would weigh me down. I walked to the staff wing. I nodded to the kid at the camera station. He did not look up. I took the maintenance tunnel access at the east end of the wing and closed the hatch behind me. The walk through the tunnel took 41 minutes. Parts of it flooded to my knees. Parts of it were so narrow I had to go sideways. I did not stop. I did not let myself think about what would happen if I had miscalculated the shift pattern, or the camera loop, or the route. I reached the surface hatch. I opened it. I climbed out into the dark. The alarms went off as I reached the helipad. I am not going to tell you how I got off the mountain. I am not going to tell you where I went after. I am telling you this from somewhere I will not name, into a camera I am going to destroy when I am done. I am telling you this because the crates are still shipping, because right now, somewhere in the world, there is a wild animal that was born under trees in a country that stopped believing in it, sealed in an unmarked wooden crate, being flown toward a place where it will be let out on a schedule that somebody in Pennsylvania has been tuning for 40 years, to kill people who will never be allowed to know what killed them. I keep coming back to the row of bones. I do not know what it meant. I do not think it meant anything I would recognize as meaning. It was just a thing an animal did, over and over, because a pack it no longer had used to do it, and it could not stop. But I sealed the door on Corridor C for the last time, knowing that row of bones was still there behind door 4, laid out largest to smallest, waiting for a morning that was going to end with a crate, and that is the part I carry. Not the sound from cell 6, not the manifests, not the tunnel. A row of bones set out in order by something that was never going to be understood and was never going to stop trying to be a pack anyway. In a place we built to make sure it never could be one again. I want to say something to you directly, as someone who has been running trail stories for a long time now and who has spent a lot of years listening to stories like the one you just heard. I cannot verify this testimony. I received the recording through a channel I am not going to describe. I have done what I can on my end. Some of the details match things I have come across independently. The program's rough timeline. The kind of FOIA pattern you would expect for a base that officially does not exist. A scatter of unexplained rural evacuations abroad that never got a straight cause and never got airtime here. I personally think the most important thing in this testimony is not the facility, and not the shipping manifests, and not even the government angle, as much as those things matter. The most important thing is that both halves of it are true at the same time. These are dangerous animals. One of them killed a man in that corridor, and they did nothing to be turned into a weapon. And there is a cruelty in what is being done to them that sits right next to the cruelty of what they are being sent to do. And neither cruelty cancels the other one out. That is the part of this story that will not let me go. That is the part I want you to sit with. If you or anyone you know has ever encountered anything like what I just described, something upright and wrong at the edge of a tree line, a wave of night killings that everyone agreed to call something else, a shipment that did not match its manifest, leave a comment. I read them. I read every single one. A lot of you asked me, after my last video, whether any of the government programs I have covered on Trail Stories ever operated like this. I think this one did. Hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Share this video with somebody who would understand it. And I will see you in the next one. Stay safe out there. Stay close to home after dark. And if someone ever offers you $180,000 a year with no questions asked, I want you to think very carefully about what the job might actually be, because somebody, somewhere, has probably already said yes, and the crates are still shipping. Before I play you the next one, I want to say upfront that this is the only piece of footage in tonight's video that I have actually held in my own hands. A man sent it to me on a memory card, wrapped in a note with no return address. The note said he had carried it around for 2 years and could not look at it anymore. It said he had tried 3 times to throw it in a lake and could not make his hand let go of it. And that mailing it to a stranger was the only way he had found to be rid of it without destroying it, because some part of him did not think he had the right to destroy it. What you are about to hear is his account, in his own words, cleaned up only where the recording was hard to make out. He asked me not to use his name. I am going to honor that. He also asked me to tell you that he is not a hunter, not a survivalist, not anybody special. He was a man on a day hike who took one wrong turn into the wrong hole in the ground, and who has spent the 2 years since then rebuilding himself around the 10 seconds it took to learn what actually lives out there. Here is what he told me. I want to start by telling you that I almost did not make it out, and that the only reason I am able to sit here and say any of this is a piece of luck so stupid and so thin that I still do not fully believe it happened the way it happened. I have gone over it so many times that the memory has worn smooth, the way a photograph wears when you carry it in your wallet too long. And there are nights I am no longer sure which parts I remember and which parts I have rebuilt. But the shape of it is true. I would swear to the shape of it on anything you put in front of me. I was hiking alone. That was my first mistake, and I know it was my first mistake, and I have heard it from everyone I have ever told. So you do not need to be the next one. I was hiking alone in limestone country in the eastern part of the state, off a trail I had done maybe a dozen times. On an afternoon in early October, when the light goes gold and long and makes you feel like the woods are yours. I want to spend a second on that feeling, because I think it is the actual beginning of this story, more than the cave is. That feeling of the woods being yours, I had that feeling a lot back then. I was a man who hiked. That was a thing I said about myself, the way people say they run or they climb. I had the boots and the pack and the little bars in foil wrappers, and I had a way of walking through the trees that said, quietly, to no one, that I belonged there, that I had earned the place, that the woods and I had an understanding. We did not have an understanding. The woods had never agreed to a single thing. I just had not been told that yet. There is a section of that trail where the ground opens up into a run of low bluffs, and the bluffs are full of holes, little ones, cracks you could not fit a cat through, where the cold air whistles out thin and constant, and a few big ones, cave mouths tall enough to walk into, that I had always passed and always meant to look at and never had. They sit back under the trees, half hidden by mountain laurel, and most people go right by them without a glance, because from the trail they just look like shadow between the rocks. That afternoon I had time. That was the whole reason. There was no more to it than that. I had time, and the light was nice, and I had a good flashlight in my pack, the heavy aluminum kind that doubles as a club, and I decided today was finally the day I went and looked in one of the big ones. I told myself I would just poke my head in. That is the phrase I actually used in my own head. Poke my head in. As if the world past the mouth of a cave is a room you can lean into. The mouth I picked was maybe 8 feet tall and set back under an overhang, so you did not see it until you were almost on top of it. I had to push through a screen of laurel to reach it, and the branches closed behind me, and I remember even that, even the branches closing, registered somewhere in the old part of my brain as a small wrongness, a door shutting at my back. I ignored it. I was good at ignoring that part of my brain. Most of us are. It is the part that has been telling us for 200,000 years to be afraid of the dark, and we have gotten very proud of not listening to it. Cool air came out of the mouth. That is the thing about caves. The air comes out at you, steady, like the hill is breathing. And it is cold, and it smells like wet stone, and it feels wonderful on a warm day. I stood in that breath of cold air for a moment and let it dry the sweat on my neck. And I felt, one last time, like a man who was in charge of his afternoon. Then I clicked on the flashlight and I went in. The first 20 feet were beautiful. I mean that without any irony at all. Flowstone down the walls like melted candle wax. Sheets of it, cream and amber where my light hit it. Little straws of white mineral hanging from the ceiling, thin as drinking straws, each one with a bead of water at its tip. My light bouncing around all that pale rock and coming back doubled. The floor was clean stone, dry and solid. I remember thinking I had been walking past this my whole life and never once bothered, and I felt good about myself for finally bothering. I felt like I was being rewarded for my curiosity. I even thought, and this is the part that makes me wince now, that I would bring people here. That this would be a thing I showed people. Then the passage bent to the right and started to go down, and the beautiful pale rock gave way to darker stuff, and the floor turned from clean stone to soft dirt with things pressed into it. And the smell changed. I need you to understand about the smell. because the smell was the warning, the real warning, the only one I was ever going to get, and I did not listen to it. It was not a cave smell anymore. A cave smells like wet rock and cold and time. This was none of those. This was an animal smell, thick, sour. It came up the passage to meet me the way heat comes off a road. Old meat and wet fur and something underneath it that was sharp and ammoniac and made the back of my throat close up on its own. A gag I had to swallow down. It was the smell of a place where a large animal lives and eats and sleeps and does not clean up after itself. Because it is an animal and it does not have to, and it never once in its life has considered that it should. Every part of me that is older than my thinking brain knew what that smell was. My skin knew. It pulled tight. My stomach knew. It dropped. The hair on my arms stood up under my sleeves. There is a thing that happens in your body, a real physical thing. When you walk into the territory of something that could eat you, and it had happened to me, and I could feel it happening. And I stood there in the dark at the top of that down-sloping passage, with every animal instinct I own, screaming a single clear word, which was out. And then my thinking brain, my stupid modern thinking brain, that has never once been eaten by anything, that has spent its whole life in rooms with locks, took the microphone away from all that ancient screaming and said, calmly, reasonably, that it was probably just bats, that caves smell bad, that I had come all this way, that I would look weak to no one, to myself if I turned around now over a smell, that I would just take a quick look around the next bend, one look, and then I would turn around and go home and have a beer and a story. I have thought a great deal in the 2 years since about the fact that the thing that nearly killed me was not the animal. The animal was just an animal, doing animal things in an animal place. The thing that nearly killed me was my own certainty that I was the most dangerous thing in that cave. That certainty walked me right down that slope. It had walked me down 1,000 slopes before, and every other time it had been right, or right enough, and so I trusted it. The way you trust a friend who has never yet let you die. I took the quick look around the next bend. The passage opened into a chamber, not huge. Maybe the size of a 2-car garage, with a low ceiling I could nearly touch if I reached up, so that I had to stoop a little coming into it. Which meant I came into that room already hunched, already made small, and I have thought about that too. And my flashlight, sweeping across the floor of it, showed me what the smell had been trying to tell me the whole way down. It was a den. There were bones, not laid out in any order, nothing like order, just scattered and worked over, the way an animal leaves them. Long bones, cracked lengthwise, the marrow gone out of them. A ribcage from something deer-sized shoved up against the far wall, still holding a little dark, dried tissue. Smaller bones I did not look at closely, and am glad I did not. And there was a hollow worn into the dirt in the center of the chamber. A shallow, packed-down bowl, the size of a mattress, lined with dragged-in leaves and shredded bark and coarse hair, matted down into the shape of something that slept there. It was a made thing, not built the way we build, but made, chosen, returned to. A bed. My brain, even then, even standing in a room lined with cracked bones, was still trying to be reasonable. Because that is what that part of the brain does. It reasons. Right up until the last second, it is allowed to. It said, bear. It said, alright. This is a bear den, you clever fool. You have wandered into a bear den. This is bad. But it is a known bad. Bear's den in caves. This is in the pamphlets. Back out slow and quiet, and go home and feel lucky, and never do this again. And I believed that. For about 3 more seconds, I believed I was standing in a bear den, and I felt the specific cold relief of a man who has found a name for the thing that frightens him. And I started backing toward the passage the way you are supposed to. Slow, quiet, keeping my light low, not turning my back. My heart going hard, but my mind holding onto that word. Bear. Like a railing in the dark. That was when the pile of leaves at the edge of my flashlight beam lifted its head. It had not been a pile of leaves. It had been lying in the far hollow the whole time, curled into itself, covered over in the same dirt and dead leaves and debris as the floor around it, so completely a part of that room that my light had passed across it twice and read it as ground. My light and my noise and my smell coming into its house had finally been enough to bring it up out of sleep. And it lifted its head out of the debris, slow, the way you or I lift our head when something has woken us, and we are not yet afraid because we do not yet understand. And it looked at me. I have spent 2 years trying to find the words for what I was looking at, and I still do not have good ones. I am going to give you the poor ones I have, and you are going to have to do the rest yourself. And I am sorry, because I would not wish the real version on you. It was not a bear. I want to be very, very clear about that. Because it is the thing people most want to take away from me. They want to hand me the word bear and have me take it and be comforted. And I cannot take it. I know what a bear is. I have seen bears in the wild, before and since. This was not that. This was not anything I had a shell for. It was long. Even folded up in that hollow, I could see it was long. And lean, wrong lean. In a way, bears are simply not. All cord and sinew, moving under matted, wet-looking fur that clung to the shape of the muscle beneath it. And when it started to unfold itself, to bring its limbs up under its weight, it did not do it the way a four-legged animal does. That rolling shoulder first heave. It came up onto its hands, with long fingers, too many joints in them, that spread out and pressed flat against the den floor. And it gathered itself onto those hands and its haunches. And it crouched there on all fours, the way a sprinter crouches down into the blocks, coiled, weight forward, ready. And I understood, without being able to say how I understood, that this was not a resting position. This was a loading position. And the head was the thing that took the floor out from under my mind, because the head was wrong on a body shaped like that. It was a wolf's head. A long, heavy snout and ears that stood straight up off the top of the skull and swiveled, both of them, forward to point at me, to aim at me. And it pulled its lips back off its teeth, slow, deliberate, and I saw the whole front set of them. And its eyes caught the beam of my flashlight and threw the light back at me as two flat, pale discs. No color, no depth, just two coins of reflected light hanging in the dark of that skull, and there was nothing behind them. Nothing that was going to reason with me. Nothing that was going to be reasoned with. Nothing that shared a single thing with me, except that we were both, briefly, alive in the same room. I have read, since, everything I could stand to find. I know the name people use for this. I am going to use it because 2 years of looking has not given me a better one, and because I am tired of talking around it. What was in that den with me was a dogman, over 7 feet, if it had chosen to stand, and it did not choose to stand, because it did not need to. Because everything it needed to do to me, it could do from that crouch, faster and lower and closer to the ground than I could ever move. We looked at each other for a length of time I have never been able to measure. It might have been half a second. It felt like most of my life. It was awake now, all the way awake, past the confusion of waking and into whatever it uses instead of thought, and it had gone completely still. That total stillness, I have only ever seen it in that room, and I hope to never see it again. It is the stillness of a thing that has already decided the outcome, and is simply waiting for the distance between you to close. Waiting the way a held breath waits, and every second of that stillness was the loudest thing I have ever heard. I did the worst possible thing. I ran. Everything you are supposed to know says do not run from a predator. Running turns you into prey. Running trips the switch, starts the chase, tells the oldest part of a hunting animal that the game is on. I knew that. I know that now, and I knew it then. Standing in that room, I had the knowledge right there in my head, clear as print. And it did not matter even slightly. It did not put 1 single gram of weight against the thing that took me, because the running was not a decision. I did not decide to run. The animal that I also am, under all the boots and the foil-wrapped bars and the certainty, took the flashlight and took my legs and simply left. And the man I think of as me was just along for it, a passenger, screaming uselessly from somewhere behind my own eyes. I ran back up the passage, up the slope, toward the bend, toward the gold light I could not see yet, but knew was up there, that I could feel up there, the way you feel ashore when you are underwater and out of air. I heard it come after me. I am not going to be able to describe that sound and do it any justice, and I have decided I am not going to try very hard, because the times I have tried hardest are the times it has followed me home the worst. It was not a howl, it was not a movie roar. It was worse than either of those, because it was so much more ordinary and so much more real. It was the sound of a large body moving very fast through a space that was too small for it, claws finding stone and tearing at it. Breath huge and fast and wet. The scrabble and knock of something that weighed every bit as much as I did, throwing itself up that passage behind me, and, under all of it, closing. I could hear that it was closing. I could hear the gap I had bought with my head start getting shorter, and I did the math with no numbers at all, the way a rabbit does it, and the math said I was not going to reach the bend. The math said it would have me on the open slope of the passage, from behind, in the next few strides. I want to tell you I did something clever here. I have wanted to tell people that for 2 years, and I am not going to start now. I did not do anything clever. I did the second worst thing a person can do while being chased, which is fall. And it turned out, by pure blind stupid chance, to be the only thing in the entire world that could have saved my life, and I get no credit for it. None. And I have had to learn to live with owing my whole life to an accident. I fell. The floor of that passage was uneven, all humps of old flowstone and loose broken rock. And I was running flat out in a bouncing flashlight beam that showed me almost nothing, looking at the dark ahead and not the ground beneath. And my foot came down half on the edge of a rock, and my ankle rolled over sideways and just let go. And I went down and to the left, hard, all my weight and all my speed dropping at once into the base of the passage wall. And the Dogman, which had already left the ground, which had launched itself at the height where my back and shoulders had been half a second before, went over me. It had committed. That is the piece I have turned over 10,000 times in the dark. A thing that fast, that heavy, moving that hard, cannot change its mind in the air. It had aimed itself at the running man, at the height of a running man's spine, and in the quarter second of its jump, the running man had stopped being there. I was not up at spine height anymore. I was down on the stone at the level of its knees, folded against the wall, and it could not correct. There was nothing for it to push against. And all of that weight, and all of that speed, and all of that certainty went over the top of me and carried on into the wall of the passage, head first. The sound it made when it hit the rock is the sound I hear on the nights I do not sleep. I have never heard anything like it before or since, and I have no wish to build the words that would let you hear it too. It was heavy, it was final. It was deeply, physically wrong, the sound of a large, fast animal driving the crown of its own skull into a solid limestone wall in the dark. And it went all the way through me, through the stone under me, through my teeth. It did not get up. I do not know if I killed it. I want to say that plainly, and then I want to set it down, because I have made a kind of uneasy peace with never knowing, and turning it over again does not help me. It came down out of that impact in a heap, half across my legs, this enormous hot reeking weight, more weight than I had let myself imagine while it was chasing me, and it twitched, a long shudder that ran down the length of it. And it made a sound that was almost nothing at all, a slow leak of air out of somewhere deep, and then it stopped moving in the specific way that living things stop moving when the thing that was running them switches off. Not the stillness from the den, a different stillness, an emptier one. I did not check. I need you to understand that not for one single instant did I consider checking, leaning in, making sure, any of the things a braver or a more foolish man might have done. I got my legs out from under it, dragging them free of that weight one at a time, and I could not feel my rolled ankle at all. The adrenaline had reached in and taken the whole lower half of my leg away as a gift, and I got myself upright against the wall. And I did not run this time, because I could not, my body would not assemble the act of running yet. I went up that passage in a lurching, scrambling, four-limbed crawl for half its length, hands and feet, past all that beautiful pale flowstone I never saw, up the slope toward the cold breath of the mouth, and out through the 8-foot mouth, through the screen of laurel that tore at me, into the very last of the gold light, which was going gray at the edges now, because I had been in there far longer than the 10 seconds it had felt like, or far shorter, I will never know. And then I did run, on an ankle I would learn, days later, was torn through in 2 places. I ran, and I fell on the trail, in the open, and I got up, and I ran, and I fell again, and I got up. I do not remember most of the trail back to the car. I have tried, and it is not there. What I have instead are fragments. The smell of the den still in my own clothes, on my own skin, so that I kept thinking it was behind me when it was only ever on me. The particular gray of the sky through the branches. My own breathing, which did not sound like my breathing. And then, sharp and complete, the memory of my hands on the steering wheel in the parking pull-off, shaking so hard I could not fit the key, the doors locked, the engine running, the heater roaring, and me just sitting there, being unable to make my hands stop for what my watch later told me was 40 minutes. Now, the footage. The footage on the card is not from that day. I did not film anything that day. I was not filming, I was dying, or as near to it as I have ever been and hope to ever be. I did not have a free thought in my head, let alone a free hand for a camera. Anyone who tells you they would have gotten the shot has never been in the room with the thing that gets the shot of you. The footage is from 3 weeks later, when I went back. I know exactly how that sounds. I have had 2 years of people looking at me a certain way when I get to this part, and I have stopped defending it. Because there is no defense that lands. I will only try to tell you the truth of why, and you can do with it what you want. Part of it was that no one believed me. I had gone to a ranger station in the days after, with a torn ankle and a story, and I had watched a kind and patient man decide in real time in front of me that I was either lying or broken, and settle on broken as the more polite option. I had told 2 friends. I had watched the same thing happen on their faces, slower, sadder, because they loved me and did not want it to be true that I had come loose. And something in me, some small, hard, stupid thing, decided that I needed proof. Not for them, for me. So that I would have one object in the world that agreed with my own memory. Part of it was that I needed to know if it was still there. Whether it was dead in that passage where I had left it, or gone, dragged off, healed, walking. As long as I did not know, it was both. As long as I did not know, every hallway in my house at night had it in it. I told myself that knowing, even knowing something terrible, would be better than the both. And part of it, the part I am least proud of and have looked at the least, was something about needing to stand at the edge of that place again from the safe side of it, to prove to myself that I could, to take back 1 inch of the ground it had taken from me. I do not think that was wisdom. I think it was the same certainty that had walked me down the slope in the first place, wearing a different coat, because that certainty does not die easily, and mine had only been wounded, so I went back. And I want to be clear about what going back actually was, because it was not what the word makes you picture. I did not go back in. I am not that brave, and I am not that stupid, and I had a torn ankle in a boot laced, so tight my foot went numb. I drove out on a grey morning, and I parked, and I walked the trail slower than I have ever walked anything. And every cold breath of air from every crack in every bluff went through me like a wire. And it took me the better part of an hour to cover ground. I used to cover in 15 minutes, because I stopped at every shadow between the rocks and made myself be sure. When I reached the mouth, I did not push through the laurel. I stood outside the screen of it, in the open, with the whole bright grey world at my back and an exit in every direction. And I reached 1 arm through the leaves, and I set a small camera on a rock ledge just inside the lip of the cave. Angled down the passage toward the bend, motion triggered, the kind of camera people strap to trees to watch deer. I made myself let go of it. I pulled my arm back out through the laurel, like I was pulling it out of water I could not see the bottom of, and I left. And it took everything I had not to run again, from nothing, from a hole in a hill in the daylight. I left it there for a week. I did not sleep well that week. I want to say that in case you think proof is a cure, it is not. Knowing the camera was out there, pointed into that dark, running, waiting, catching whatever came up that passage, put the cave inside my house in a new way. Now the dark I could not stop thinking about was a specific dark, with a lens in it, filling up second by second with whatever was true. I would lie in bed and think about the little red light of the sensor, out there under the hill, blinking in the black, and about what might walk into its view and out again while I lay safe, under a roof 20 miles away, pretending to sleep. After a week, I drove back out. Same slow walk, same wire of cold air through me at every crack, same standing outside the laurel in the open. I reached in, and for one bad moment, my hand could not find the ledge, and I thought the camera was gone, taken, and my whole body went to ice. Then my fingers found it, a foot to the left of where I thought I had left it, and I told myself it had slipped, that ledges are uneven. that a drop of water could have shifted it over a week. I still tell myself that. I took it down without ever once putting my head or my light past the mouth of that cave, and I walked out, and I did not look at the card until I was home, in a lit room, with the door locked, in the middle of the afternoon, which was the only time I could stand to. Most of the card was nothing. That is what a week of trail footage is. It is nothing, over and over, in high definition. Water dripping. The light past the mouth going up and down with the days. A mouse, twice, that tripped the motion sensor and sent my heart into my throat, both times before I saw what it was. Long stretches of grey passage and pale flowstone and the dark going down and to the right toward the bend. Holding still, holding still, holding still. I scrubbed through hours of it with my thumb on the fast forward. Half of me praying I would find nothing and be able to call myself broken and start healing, and half of me needing, badly, to be right. And then there are 7 seconds. 7 seconds, near the end of the 4th day, in full dark, in the flat grey-green of the camera's night vision. 7 seconds, where something comes up the passage toward the lens, into the near edge of the den chamber, where the camera could just barely reach, and it crouches, low, on those long hands, and it lifts its head, and it turns, slow, toward the little unblinking eye on the ledge. And its eyes throw the infrared straight back as 2 flat pale discs. Exactly. The way they threw my flashlight back at me 3 weeks and a lifetime earlier, and it comes forward, low, coiled, that same loading crouch, until it fills the frame, until there is nothing in the frame but the front of that wolf's skull and those 2 coins of light where the eyes should be. And then the clip ends, because the thing came close enough to trip some limit of the camera, or because I have simply never been able to watch past that point. I genuinely no longer remember which, so it was not dead, or there was more than one. I have lived with both of those for 2 years, and I do not like either of them, and I do not know which is true. Either I did not kill it, and it healed, and it went back to its bed in the dark, under the hill, and it is there now. Or I did kill it, that night in the passage, and something else answered the camera a week later, which means there was never only one. Which means, the whole time I stood in that den, doing my clever backward walk with the word bear in my mouth, I had been counting wrong, badly wrong, in a way that does not bear thinking about. I do not know which of those is the world I live in. I am never going back a 3rd time to find out. There is no version of me left that wants the answer more than it wants to never be in that dark again. That is the footage. That is the whole of what I have, the total physical evidence of the worst and truest thing that ever happened to me. 7 seconds, and a torn ankle that still aches when the weather turns. I sent it to you because you were the only person I could find who would not either laugh at me or try to make me famous off it. And because I could not keep it in my house one more night, and because throwing it in a lake felt, somehow, like lying. Here is the last thing I want to say, and then I am done, and then I would like to never say any of it again. Everyone focuses on the 7 seconds. The eyes, the face, the way it comes at the camera. And I understand that. I do. That is the scary part. That is the part that goes in the thumbnail. That is the part that makes people watch. I am not naive about why you are listening to me right now. But that is not the part that changed me. The 7 seconds only frightened me. Something else changed me, and it is smaller, and it is harder to put in a thumbnail, and it is the only thing I actually came here to say. I walked into that hillside on a beautiful afternoon feeling like the woods belonged to me, like the ground was mine to poke around in. Like a hole in a bluff was a thing I was owed a look at, because I was a man who hiked, because I had the boots. Because I had walked 1,000 safe trails, and nothing had ever once contradicted my certainty that I sat at the top of every place I set foot. And the woods let me find out, in the space of about 10 seconds in the dark, exactly how wrong I had always been, and exactly how far down the real list I actually sit. And the only reason I got to go on living with that knowledge instead of becoming another cracked bone against a wall was that my ankle happened to turn on a rock at the single instant in my entire life when turning my ankle was the only thing in the universe that could have saved me. That is not a victory. I did not beat it. A man does not beat that. I tripped and it missed and it hit a wall and I crawled out. That is all that happened. Every bit of meaning I have tried to hang on it since is just me, needing the story to have a shape that lets me sleep. I do not hike alone anymore. I mostly do not hike at all. I do not go anywhere near the holes. And when the air comes cold and clean out of a crack in the rock now, and it smells like wet stone, I stand very still, and I make myself smell it all the way to the bottom, past the stone, because I know now that sometimes under the wet stone there is a second smell. And that second smell is the only warning you are ever going to get, and it is not a loud one. And the part of you that will want to explain it away as bats, or as nothing, or as your imagination, is the exact same part of you that will walk you down the slope. Listen to the other part, the old part, the part that is afraid of the dark. It is not being silly. It has been right for 200,000 years, and it was right about the cave. And I am only here to tell you any of this because once, for 10 stupid seconds, the ground did for me what I was too proud to do for myself. That is his account. I have the card. I have the note. I have listened to that recording more times than is probably good for me. I will tell you what I told him when I finally got him on the phone, after weeks of a number that only ever went to voicemail. I told him that of everything people send me, the ones that actually scare me are never the ones that are trying to. The staged ones try. The hoaxes try. They try so hard. They reach for you. His did not reach for me. He was not building a case. He was not selling anything. He was a man trying to get something out of his house so he could sleep, and he had decided, for reasons I do not fully understand and am grateful for, that mailing it to me counted as setting it down. That is the kind I believe. Not because I can prove it. I cannot prove a second of it, and I will not pretend to you that I can. I believe it because I have heard a lot of people lie about the woods, and I have heard a few people tell the truth about the woods. And the truth has a sound, and he's had it. You know the rest by now. If you have a story like this, if you have ever stood at the mouth of somewhere dark and smelled that second smell under the stone and been smart enough or lucky enough to walk away, leave it in the comments. I read every single one, I mean that. The comments on this channel are the closest thing I have found to a map of the places we are not supposed to go. Hit the subscribe button if you have not already. Share this one with somebody who is a little too sure of themselves in the outdoors, somebody who has the boots and the certainty. Because that is exactly the person this story is for, and they will not thank you, and they should. Stay safe out there, stay close to home after dark. And if the air coming up out of a hole in the ground ever smells like anything other than cold, clean stone, do not go and take a look. Turn around. Be the person who felt a little silly and went home. That person gets old. Real or fake, you decide.